Well, since we last met, the world has changed.
Yes.
Oh, we just met 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It even changed this morning.
What happened this morning?
Oh, my God, there's riots all over the American embassies in all.
There's riots in at all the American embassies in Arab countries.
Yes, in Lebanon, they were showing it on CNN.
It's the American embassies.
Well, that's not going to be good.
No,
I mean, listen, at this point, I fear for Biden, who's in Jerusalem.
He made a terrific speech.
Yeah, he
He
did.
was great.
He has
really
been, right. My Israeli friends have more faith in him than Netanyahu.
Oh, wow.
Low bar, low bar.
Exactly. And when I hear these people talk about him having dementia.
Yeah, there's no way he has
No way he
dementia.
has.
Yeah. Anyway, I've seen Sue a couple times, and she said, "Wow, how did I pick a story on Israel?" Which, I did not, but it was in, but it's just, here we are talking about Israel. And let's talk a little bit about the author first. Let's bring him up. He's a handsome guy. Well, he is.
Important to know.
Yeah, it is important to know. I mean, when they're not handsome, I don't say, well, they're not handsome, but a lot of these guys, Michael Chabon, who's the other guy, Nathan Englander. I mean, a lot of these are younger guys. Anyway, Scott Nadelson grew up in northern New Jersey before escaping to Oregon. I'm sure he wrote that, where he has lived for the past 24 years. He has published 4 collections of short stories. The Fourth Corner of the World, named a Jewish Fiction Prize honor book by the Association of Jewish Libraries. Aftermath, our story is from that book, Aftermath. The Cantor's Daughter and Saving Stanley. The Brickman Stories and a memoir. The next, Scott Nadelson, A Life in Progress. His novel Between You and Me was published by Eugene Books. That's in Oregon. And his new-ish story collection, One of Us, was published in 2020. So he's won a lot of different awards, and he seems like a very, obviously he's got a good Jewish background. I'd like to know a little bit more about his background because, well, first I'll say to everybody, how did you like the story? And then I'll go into, as I, psychoanalyze him. Yes, Sue Wellick.
I love this story.
She loved the story.
And
I like the story too. I thought it was very timely.
Because my husband and I, our bar and bat mitzvah gift to each of our grandchildren was a trip. Now, all my grandchildren have been to Israel. We took a couple of family trips to Israel. So that wasn't the deal. What we told them for their bar bat mitzvah gift, they could choose a place in the world that they wanted to go. And if it was within reason, we would take them. Now, I have to tell you, if for 1 minute I thought that all my grandchildren were doing while we were there was wishing to go home. I mean, we had one on the first trip, we took our granddaughter to England because that's where her mother was born. And I mean, we lived there for a while. So we wanted to show her, all that. Do you know that on the plane, when we got on the plane to come home, she started to cry. Why was she crying? Because we were leaving. She wanted to stay.
Right.
She was having such a good time. And so when I read this, and I didn't forget to shut my husband up and tell him be quiet.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like everything brought back memories to me of our trips, but so opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of dysfunction going on here, and we're going to talk about that. Alice.
Well, I agree with Sue. I really liked it. I didn't have a direct memory like you did, but I just thought he did such a good job of getting, what do the grandparents feel? What is this 13-year-old feeling? I don't even know if it was his stepfather yet.
No,
They
they
married,
were
but
married.
boyfriend.
No,
Boyfriend.
Dennis.
Dennis. I just thought he had all, and then the father, I just thought he did such a good job.
I agree.
Characters
were well.
And such a short,
Yeah.
yeah,
I agree with you.
you felt like you knew these people,
totally.
right, at the end of the story.
Janice.
There was one sentence here from our trip to Israel that really got me. And it says, out here, he couldn't tell Jews from Arabs. When I was in Israel, I would say, yeah, are they Jewish? They don't look Jewish to me. I thought we were always surrounded by Arabs. And they're all Jewish, you would say. But
Yeah.
we live in an Ashkenazi-based Jewish world. We
Yeah.
think everybody looks the same. And I thought that he captured that was amazing.
And I thought he did do a good job on that. We call it Ashkenormative. The Sephardi look a lot more like Arabs. And my junior year abroad, when I spent the year in Israel, that's where I met Arthur, 79. They did, I think, especially to the women, scare us about not being taken in by Arabs who wanted to date us, and they might be wearing, an Israeli uniform. And look, we saw what Hamas did 2 weeks ago, where they were dressed in, policemen, and I don't know how they got the uniforms, but they did. So, and I think, I don't know if I was but I was when I was there, I was very, very scared. I think now, now all bets are off. If I had discussed this 2 weeks ago, I would have said, relationships have normalized a little bit, but now all bets are off the table. The characters in Scott Nadelson's third collection are living in the wake of momentous events, which is so interesting to think about right now. The rupture of relationships, the loss of loved ones, the dissolution of dreams, and yet they find new ways of forging on with their lives, making accommodations that are sometimes delusional, sometimes destructive, sometimes even healthy. And Oslo, a 13-year-old boy on a trip to Israel with his grandparents, grapples with his father's abandonment and his own rocky coming of age. So, Sandy, you need to unmute.
I really thought it was well written, but it was very painful to read. David and I have been up every night, and I was reading it. I left it for last night, which was right after the news about the hospital.
Yeah.
So it was very painful. And then we did get a WhatsApp from our grandson, and he had been moved. So I think he's in a less dangerous spot than he had been. But we were listening to every news station, and this one Arab spokesman said that thing with the music festival, dance festival, that it never happened. He had the nerve to tell these people on international television that never happened, that the Israelis made that up to have an excuse to come into Gaza. How can we work with people like this? How can we? And when we're talking about how my two grandsons from that daughter, their grandfather is from Turkey and the grandmother from Iran. So one of the boys looks very much like an Arab. He could easily pass for it. They both look Sephardic. The one who's in Israel on the border there with Gaza, he looks like he's aged 10 years in 10 days. We've seen it every couple days. He sends something out to us of him and his soldiers, and he looks like he's just aged 10 years.
Right. I said to someone that, they called up 350,000 reservists. Thank you. And so a lot of they're in their 20s. But now we have all these men and women sitting, waiting for a week, doing nothing. I don't know if they can have their phones on because that would track where they are. I never mind having batteries and chargers and all of that type of stuff. I think that the psychological warfare, when Hamas said we didn't do that, and of course they immediately blamed the hospital on Israel, and we don't think it was Israel, and Biden said that as well. It's just very hard to watch all of this. It's absolutely painful. And I agree with you that we have a couple of congregants with nieces, grandchildren in the army, and it's painful to watch. But back to the story. Yes, go ahead.
Because of what's going on, it was very painful to read this story.
Mhm.
It was the kind of humor when I was living in Israel. This is the kind of humor they had on Saturday Night Live there.
Yeah.
About American tourists. It's really like, I don't want to say sick humor, but it's not a pretty picture.
Right.
Of what
I don't think this paints us great.
Why don't you let me talk?
David is very, very emotional this week.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
He wants to do one thing. He wants to go over there and hand Netanyahu over to the Gazans. And he thinks the war will stop.
Yeah, it will.
He's got unfortunately, he has a point. Right. I do think that this is going to topple his government. I absolutely think this is going to topple his government. But and there's a unity government now. I can talk a little bit about that. Benny Gantz is with him. So hopefully, they can pull themselves together, which of course is more than we can say about our government. But that is a story for another time. Do you think this was a realistic? Yes, Janice thinks it's a realistic.
Because not everybody, although they think Israel's nice, not everybody has that connection like their grandma. When our family went to Israel, my daughter wouldn't go. She's afraid. She's not going.
Yeah.
Not, she wasn't adamant like the husband, but she was afraid and wouldn't go. On the other hand, my 75-year-old Machatanista, who lived in Iran until the Shah came, has his tickets. He's going to help Israel. I said, what do you think you're going to do? You're 75 years old. He said, whatever I can do, I'll distribute food, I'll cook, I'll do whatever. I'm going back. I got my education in Israel when I escaped Iran.
All right.
And if I die in Israel, that's where I belong.
They're 70, 75 first cousins. They live in Beersheba. It's in the south. They're making sandwiches for the troops. Terry, Alice, then Andy.
Well, I just felt, first of all, in light of what happened, I wasn't able to be at the last session, so I just watched it and listening to what all of you were saying and then reading the story. Everything is different.
Yeah.
Because of what's happened.
Absolutely. Everything. Yes.
It just colors it completely different. But in terms of the reality of the story, the realistic pieces of it, I felt some of the little anecdotes. The scene in Mea Shireen where the tour group that was dressed inappropriately.
Yeah.
We were so forewarned when we would go to Israel with a group. Make sure that you're, dressed appropriately, the whole thing. That's very realistic. And when they were in the Arab market and having falafel, and the guide was talking about the friendships with the Palestinians, and then the owner came out and hugged him, my friend, and put the keffiyeh on him, and then said, "Oh, I'm giving it back to you." And he said, no, you keep it. And then he said, "That'll be 20 shekels."
Yeah, I mean, the thing that it was very realistic. We don't realize sometimes, and I think this frankly is in any country. When you are with a tour guide and you go to a tour shop, he's got a relationship. It doesn't matter if you're in Israel or Costa Rica or Hawaii. That's the way of the world, and that's how people set that up. Okay, Alice, then Andy.
Oh, no. Okay, I think there's two things that are really important for us to talk about, and I need some help with the history. Okay, it's called Oslo.
Right.
What was this story written before or after the Oslo Accord?
That's a good question. I can It's very close.
But the second thing,
1995,
I know, but this is
So
the,
they were 1990.
This is 95.
No, I
but the
know.
other important thing is this is August 1995.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I think this part of it, I think I am remembering. Later in 1995 was when Rabin was assassinated. I'm almost positive, I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because we used to host Israeli scouts.
Yes,
And
it was
I know-
November 1995,
Yes,
Rabin
yes.
was assassinated. Yeah.
Because I remember we had scouts the summer of
Yes.
1995, so I know, because it gets me chills, because I remember thinking, oh my God, we had the scouts that summer, and then just a few months later, Rabin was assassinated, and it changed. I mean, I feel like 1995, there was so much hope
Yeah.
that things were gonna be better, and
Yeah.
then, I mean.
Right.
Now it's falling apart again, but doesn't seem to you, I mean, it seems to me like we think things are getting better, and then this happens.
Right.
And we
So
think things are getting better, and then this happened.
Oslo was in 1993.
Oh, great.
Um,
Okay.
and even beforehand. And I think that Rabin's assassination, I was on a retreat with 5th and 6th graders at Osrui. And I always left early to come back. And I had, are we going to do a service? What are we going to say to the kids? And I don't run the school anymore, but I feel like we were in that same catch 22 of what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And unfortunately, we have crisis curriculum. I mean, we have all these things ready to go because, well, I've been doing it a long time because that was over 30 years ago, but it's heartbreaking. All right.
Why did you title this?
I
mean,
have been thinking about that. I have some ideas. I want to get Andy and Ellen, and then
I just want to.
I think that's on the table. If you think you know why they titled it Oslo, tell us.
Titled Oslo because there was a certain feeling in Israel after Oslo.
I think all right. I think he titled it Oslo because of the relationships in the family.
Oh, that's a good.
Because of Dennis, because of the grandfather, because of the father, the father had to come to an accord of some type. And I don't know. I mean, we could ask him. And even Joel, that's the kid's name, the father kind of like just leaving him. That was terrible. All right, Andy.
Well, a whole other part of this, which I guess seemed to resonate with me because I could relate to it. It was number one, the Sunday school teacher.
Oh yeah.
All those things. And that was infuriating to me, that she was feeding them this, I call it propaganda. And I was
in Israel, they would call it Hasbara.
Oh.
Which is the Hebrew term for propaganda. But it sounds better. Hasbara sounds better than propaganda.
Here he's getting this and he's questioning it. And I could relate to that. And I think I was on his side. And then the whole thing about not marrying a shiksa and that whole, how it's going to end in divorce. And, I was very rebellious. So I just felt like I didn't like these platitudes and these generalizations. And I will say this, I still think it holds. And I think that, the people are not necessarily the government, and there's certainly, if a man's government is going to topple because of what he did, I just think I think when you repeat the same thing, you get the same results. And we have to have a long view. So, but mostly I as far as the book, I felt really empathetic to the grandson, to Joel, and how they treated him, and Mr. Schreiber and the whole thing. I felt like, and the grandparents were almost.
I'm so glad. We're going to put a pin in the Hebrew teacher. We're going to come back to that. But Alan.
the Oslo, I want to understand more about the title, but I think he definitely puts August 95, is that the year, I think, in the beginning. And I bet by the time it was published, he had to have known that Rabin was assassinated, that the piece was at grave.
It's copyright 2011.
Yeah, so it's after, obviously after that. And the Oslo Accord, I guess finding peace it's kind of a metaphor for Joel's trying to find peace in his family, I take it. And it's really, you do empathize with Joel. I totally agree with Andy. But it's sad, you were, and it's ironic that we're reading it now with what's going on in Israel, because you read it any other time and you would read it for everything else we're going to discuss. But it's just the up and down in terms of being positive towards a peace negotiation, which we all want so desperately for the last 75 years. And, here we are back at what seems to be worse than square one.
Right. So the Hebrew teachers, I've been to Israel to help train the Israelis, the shlichim, the shaliach, who come here to our camps. And we heard a speaker, and Rachel Corazon, and she used to do Holocaust education, but she came to train the Mishlachat, and she said to them, and this was in Hebrew, and I understood most of it, and somebody was translating for us. She said, to these Israelis, and this was, I don't know, 5 years ago, what's your Hebrew teacher's names? And they said, Bracha, Tzippi, Yehudit. And she said, what do they teach you about the galut? That's the diaspora. And the galut is terrible. The diaspora, it's terrible out there. And what do they teach you? Israel, that's the place to be. But there is another term. She goes, but what do they teach you about chutz la'aretz? And chutz la'aretz means outside of Israel. Well, that's where you vacation and you buy all your presents and you go to visit.
So true.
And what's the difference between chutz la'aretz and galut? And that mentality, and Mrs. Nathanson, that was the name of the teacher, she had that mentality. And I try to be as self-reflective as possible. And I'm a boomer, and I have a very romantic relationship with Israel. And I know that. I also know my kids, who for the most part are millennials, maybe Ethan's a Gen Z, do not have that romantic relationship with Israel. They do not have memories of 67, 73 and Tebbe when Israel was an underdog. They have a much more, Israel as the aggressor, Israel as, and they, look at it in a very different way. And I have worked very hard for them to have relationships with Israel. They went to day school, they went to camp. They studied in Israel, for gosh sake. So I think that having also supervised back in the day, not right now, supervised these Israeli teachers, they're very hard to supervise because, so that, let's say Mrs. Nathanson, there's still 30 years later, there's Mrs. Nathanson's teaching the same way. And the book that I highly, highly recommend, if not for you, for your grandchildren, it's by Sivan Zakai, and My Second Favorite Country. And it tells us that kids can, from a young age, and she did a longitudinal study, can hold two things in their head, that Israel is our homeland and there's a war going on. And she also talks about that you need to name, who do we have a war against? The Palestinians or Hamas, that if you let kids make up what's happening there, your imagination is much worse than, well, in this case, unfortunately, isn't much worse. But, and of course, I would just have to add very quickly, we're not talking about that, but, you only answer what the kid asks. You don't have to get into all the details. So I think that, again, Andy, I'm just glad that you brought up Mrs. Nathanson, because she is, she's from Central Casting, and we could, if we wrote this story today, she'd still be in it. And eventually that generation is not going to be here anymore. And Finding Hebrew teachers, super difficult. Finding religious school teachers, super difficult. And they're not, sometimes I would have parents come in and, they want to talk to whatever teacher it was. I go, I don't hire them full time. Like they have full-time jobs and you can see them on Sunday and I can try to get up a time for you to talk to them, but it's I don't want to say it's a thankless job, but it's a hard job. Religious school, Hebrew school. What I say about religious school, religious school is subjective. Okay, you know 9 of the 10 commandments. Frankly, that's okay. But in Hebrew school, you have to know all the letters. You can't not know Aleph. So they have a hard road. It's not easy. It's just not easy. Okay, back to our book. What did you think of Dennis? Ellen, go ahead.
I think Dennis made me feel as sorry for Joel as I could. I mean, he had issues with his own father and his own mom and now his grandparents and even the tour guide. But Dennis, Dennis was trying to be a nice guy. So you got to give him credit for that, I think. But it was just so frustrating that he didn't. And it was really his behavior with Dennis that he copied in Israel, I thought. When he was staying in the bathroom at the very end of the story because he didn't want to deal with his grandparents, his avoidance and there's a passive aggressive behavior, I guess is just part of his personality at that point. Hopefully he's going to learn at some point.
Yeah. Alice and then Janice, then Joyce.
Yeah, I think for me, the essence of the story was Joel finding out who he was. He's a 13-year-old. And on I think page 359 and also the last paragraph, 362. But 359, the shopkeeper said, "You are Jew?" And Joel blinked. Was he supposed to answer? I think he's trying to figure out, am I a Jew? What does that mean? And then he starts thinking about his religious school teacher saying, "Never apologize for who you are." Well, I think that is important, never apologize for who you are. But I think Joel doesn't even really know who is he. And then the last paragraph, he's sitting on the toilet and he's looking at all the words, the graffiti, and blah, 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 blah. The illegible writing on the door might have told important secrets if only he could read it.
If only he could read Hebrew.
Exactly. So I think, I think he's thinking like, well, yeah, all these years I was supposed to be learning Hebrew. Maybe I really didn't learn it. And maybe the secret to life would have appeared if he knew how to read Hebrew. I just think there's a lot of, he has a father, he has the mother's boyfriend, he has the grandfather, then he has
the grandmother.
And grandmother, but I'm thinking of
the tour guide.
He's a young man. What does it mean to be a man? And he's questioning, why did his grandfather not go over to Israel?
Yes.
Like Lou did. And, I don't think you're saying right or wrong.
Yeah.
Answer. He's trying to figure out. He has all these men in his life. What's the right way?
I totally agree with you. Janice, then Joyce.
2 things. I think
then
that
Ellen, then Sue.
he needs his father. And until that gets settled, and hopefully it will, his life is what it is.
Right.
Because this is going to follow him into adulthood, that feeling. He needs to resolve things with his father. The number 2 thing, as far as Hebrew goes, you're right. Hebrew school is not what's going to give our children a sense of being Jewish. My feeling is camp.
Yeah.
And I teach my grandchildren Yiddish word of the day.
Yeah.
I try to give them the feeling of Yiddish so they have the feeling, because they're not going to get the Hebrew education going 4 days a week like in our time. And so give them the feeling of being Jewish and what it means and the fun and the celebrations for the holidays. And that's the best we can do.
Yeah. I'll put a pin in that, Joyce.
Janice, I agree with you. However, when I read that he couldn't decipher the writing on the wall, you know, which is in itself a metaphor. I
Yes.
mean, where was his education?
No.
No.
That graffiti was in cursive. I wouldn't be able to read it. I'm
Okay.
sure a lot of it was Arabic slang because that's what the swear words are in Israel. And there's no way under God's green earth that he could do it. I used to tell parents when they would come to me, I go, listen, I have a good Hebrew program. We do some modern Hebrew, but your kid is not going to get off the bus in Tel Aviv and get directions to your hotel. It's just, we, for the most part, teach our kids how to daven in the order of the service. What does Baruch mean? What does Shalom mean? But modern spoken Hebrew, and I'm sure the graffiti wasn't in the block letters that our kids know, because it just wasn't. So and that's something we just have to keep in mind. But that's not, I used to teach my kids. I mean, I think it's important that they learn to read cursive and all of that stuff, because if you do, I think Hebrew school is a launch point to Hebrew in high school and Hebrew in college. And when you take Hebrew in college, which I did, that's the only language class that you go into that 90% of the kids have a background, know how to read the you know, because they all went to Hebrew school. And yeah.
All right, then I correct.
Yeah.
Because I really reacted.
That's very interesting. All right, I have Ellen and then Sue.
I mean, no one's mentioned this, but I've been divorced, and a lot of this, he's a very typical 13-year-old. Most of his thoughts, everything he goes through, the stuff that's happening to him,
Yes.
because his parents are divorced. This is really a typical 13-year-old.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's why we have bar mitzvah at 13. Sue.
So your original question.
Yeah.
Was what do we think of Dennis?
Yes, it was.
And
What do you
no
think of
one
Dennis?
answered that
No one answered. That's
So
right. What do we
I
think of
think-
Dennis? Merle, I'll get you.
I think that Dennis was extremely patient. And here's this kid who is so torn up by the absence of his father, by his mother taking up with Dennis, a Gentile man. And he starts with all the little tricks he plays against Dennis. He shoots a baby gun. I mean, he does all these.
The wallet.
The wallet. He does all these things to get Dennis to, you know, stick it to him. And Dennis is always forgiving him and always trying to make peace with him. And it made me think, this is a pretty decent guy. And this kid should be glad to have this man in his life.
Yeah.
Because he was good to Joel.
Yeah.
In spite of all the things that Joel was doing to him.
Agreed. Merle, then Terry.
I thought Dennis introduced into some stereotypes that I couldn't even understand how Dennis knew what he said he knew. He noticed that at the bar mitzvah, Joel had danced with blonde girls, all Christian. How exactly he knew that, I don't know, because many Jewish women are blonde. And he said to him, "You've got an eye for the shiksas, huh, pal? You know about Portnoy's complaint?" Joel said, "I'm not complaining." This, he's teaching him without just saying it out loud exactly. Most blondes are not Jewish. I thought that was kind of a ridiculous thing, though, because there are so many Eastern European Jews that are, all of my aunts were platinum blonde when they were young. I mean, they were from Poland and they were all blonde. So I thought that was kind of ridiculous, but also it's a little inappropriate. That boy would have not read Portnoy's complaint.
We hope not.
I just thought Dennis had like logorrhea. He couldn't stop talking. He had a condition as far as I could see.
Well, it's I didn't think about it, but you're right. How would he know about the word shiksa? And the thing, I still agree with Sue a little bit. He when he kept talking, that would press all my buttons, and that was driving me crazy about him. Like, oh, how do you put up with that? But him putting up with Joel, I was like, you know, letting the air out of the tires. I mean, that is some pretty bad mischief. that Joel got into.
There was one more thing about 13-year-old boy. I once tutored a 13-year-old boy and he was learning Spanish from me. His father was Argentinian. He was a psychiatrist. He didn't want to teach his own child Spanish because of the tension between parent and child. So one summer, the father said, I'm taking my 3 boys to Europe. My wife and I are going to show them all around Europe. So when they got back, I said to the 13-year-old boy, how did you like Europe? Was it wonderful? He said, so boring. Oh, the music. He said, I did like the pizza in Italy.
Yeah. There you go.
So all of this effort you put into taking a child to Europe or Israel, it might not please them at that time, but maybe years later they'll appreciate that you took them on the trip. Maybe
You can only hope.
they'll
I
go
don't.
in college and they appreciate it more. Who knows?
Yeah. Terry and then Joyce.
Okay, so first of all, I read it twice. And I initially thought Dennis wasn't Jewish, but then I couldn't find where it said he wasn't Jewish. Did it specifically say that?
I think it does. Yeah.
That's-
Yeah.
I couldn't find it. And then I thought, wait, is he Jewish? Because then when you made the shiksa remark, I went,
Yeah.
"Huh,
Huh.
well, maybe he is
Yeah.
Jewish." And yet I'm picturing this non-Jewish.
That's true.
man. And I,
Right.
and I just, I'd
Oh,
love to know if somebody.
here it is, page 353.
Well, I'm on my.
And though he wasn't even Jew, but Dennis had been close by, and though he wasn't even Jewish, started talking about the origins of the comic.
Okay.
Right.
I have a feeling I have read that. Now,
Yeah.
the other thing that I also.
He was certainly a know-it-all.
He certainly was. The other thing, though, is that there was a moment, can't find that either, where I think Joel said, maybe I should try to like him. Am I imagining that? I feel like there was that one time where he said.
Yeah, I think it was later. I mean, I felt bad. I mean, Joel's father abandoned him.
And when he realized.
Yes.
And when the comment was made, and maybe it was after that.
Yeah.
No, but, the only one who stuck up for, the father was the grandmother.
Yeah.
Everyone else knew him for what he was.
Right.
And Joel definitely, it started to sink in that his father was never going to
Right.
call,
Right.
have him come and visit, and that this was all wishful thinking on his part, but sadly, it was not going to come to pass.
Right. On page 358, Joel spills the Coke on Dennis's lap. From the sink where he was mopping up his crotch with a dish towel, Dennis said, if he says it was an accident, then I believe him. His voice was softer than usual, almost as tired as Joel's mother, with a little tremble to it that made Joel furious. The last thing in the world he wanted was to feel sorry for the man. Dennis kept his back to them, fanning the wet spot with a pot lid. No need to apologize. We'll just let it go. Okay, pal. I don't think any 13-year-old likes to be called pal.
It could show that maybe he really cared so much about Joel's mother.
Yes.
That he really was going to just stick it out regardless
Right.
of what this kid did.
I mean, I think that Dennis showed more interest than the father.
Totally.
The father kept brushing him off. He wanted to talk to him. He wanted to this. Gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. And even though Dennis, right, even though Dennis was super annoying. Andy.
I really feel so sorry for Joel because nobody really understood him. I mean, I think that's why he got sick. I mean, he just couldn't hold it in. Really, who related to him or really was listening to him? And he was so I mean, it was just very sad to me. And I think Dennis probably was the only one that at least, made an attempt to be where he was, even though he didn't do a good job of it.
No.
But the grandparents, I mean, I don't know, everybody was on their own track and with their own little things. And they had this 13-year-old boy that they had set out. I mean, they had good intentions, but I just felt like that was just a very coming of age story that was sad. And I think that the adults never set any examples. And I would say that from the teacher to the people they met on the street. I mean, what is Judaism about? What are the teachings? Nobody set an example. And that's what really I can't bear.
Agreed. Although I don't know, I think they tried. I think the whole trip was trying to show them Jewish values. Alice.
I think it was that they weren't setting an example. I think that there's lots of different examples that you can set, and everybody had their own feeling of what it meant to be a Jew. And it didn't necessarily agree with anything that we're thinking or with each other, but this is what they felt. This is what the teacher felt. This is what the grandparents felt like taking their grandson to Israel.
The grandmother.
Oh, the grandmother, okay.
And she
Okay,
couldn't, the grandmother, and
Yeah.
she couldn't hold it in.
Yeah.
And they knew for 6 months and she was so excited.
But the other thing to say is, it kind of reminds me of the Peanuts cartoon where it's like all the adults are like blah, 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 blah. And it's only the kids. I think all this adult stuff in, it was overwhelming.
When Birthright was first formed, people, it was a trip that you go on with your peers. And I think family trips, because basically this was about 30 years ago, 28, whatever. Family trips have changed. They realize that they have to engage the kids. And I think on our last trip to Israel, which was in February, I think they went to Leket, where you can actually harvest food that goes to poor people who need food. So I think that trips have changed to Israel. And I think that the peer trip is very, very powerful. And, Birthright was a game changer. I'm not saying Birthright does not. Sometimes I affectionately call it a booze cruise because, you can drink in Israel after 18 and so on and so forth. But excuse me. I do think that there's something to be said about going with your peers and then seeing Israeli peers because they're soldiers who guarded the trips. Sandy, and then Joyce, then Sue.
My grandchildren have mostly all gone on Birthright, but I don't like Birthright. I don't dislike it. I just don't think it's anywhere enough. I think it's wonderful if kids go to Israel for at least 6 months to a year and stay with Israelis and have more time to ask questions and to think for themselves and really feel what it's like to be an Israeli. The other thing I wanted to say was the best people I ever met were the teachers in the Ulpan. I don't know where they found them, but I was in a couple of Ulpans because I moved around my first year. They were saints. These women who taught the Ulpan, they were the ones who gave us the love for the people and the land. And
I agree with you. My last Ulpan was in 79 and I want to go back for another Ulpan, but and it is mainly women. I had one man, but their love of the language and usually in an Ulpan in Israel, it's not just Americans. And there's a lot of French and Spanish speaking, and the teacher only speaks in Hebrew. So you have to describe a word that people don't know in Hebrew. It's just not easy. But Sandy, I think you're right.
The only thing is that today, when I speak Hebrew in Israel or with my grandchildren, they laugh at me because they say, Grandma, you're speaking Ulpan Ivrit.
Yeah, interesting. That is very funny.
It's correct, but it's not the way they talk on the street.
No, it's not. Okay, Joyce and then Sue.
I was just thinking about the mother. And I don't think she was ever given a name.
Oh, interesting.
So she was almost like a non-entity.
There wasn't.
She was almost voiceless in the story.
No character development with the mother.
She couldn't stand up to her ex-husband. Well, she divorced him or.
Yeah.
he divorced her.
And Dennis, how do you get a word in?
Well, you wouldn't. Um,
He would
and
drive me
she-
nuts.
She did everything
Nuts.
that her, her parents wanted.
Oh,
her to
yeah.
do.
Yes.
Um.
She did everything the parents wanted to do.
She believed everything Joel told her.
Yeah, right. She believed everything everyone told her.
Yeah.
Dennis, her parents.
She was like, I viewed her almost like a wet mom.
Yeah. Now, she didn't talk bad about the husband, the father.
No, no.
I'm trying to find,
She said,
yeah.
"Don't count on
Oh,
it."
don't count. Well, but that was true.
No, did absolutely.
Sue.
You were talking about birthright.
Yeah.
And when birthright was first, came into being, it was only for young people who had never been to Israel.
Yes.
And then they changed.
Yes.
Because all my grandchildren have been to Israel.
Right.
Because we took a
Yeah.
number of family trips.
Right.
But they all, the ones who are over 18.
Right.
have all been on birthright,
Hmm.
even though they had been to Israel before.
Yeah.
And they loved it.
Yeah.
They really loved it. And it gave them, they met other peer Jewish young people that they remained friends with.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah.
And it was a really good experience for all of them.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I don't know. There's different opinions of thought about birthright. I'm in favor for it. I think that as educators, we don't do a good job in trying to get them back after they've been, because they're much more willing to open up to Jewish experiences and do Jewish things and maybe come back to synagogue and meet one another again. And I think that we need to capitalize on that.
The other
So
thing
go ahead.
I wanted to say is my youngest daughter lived on a moshav for, I can't remember, but quite a while. And she learned to shoot an Uzi.
Yeah.
Oh, yay. Well, she was near Jericho in the
Yeah.
West Bank.
Yeah.
And when we went to Israel the summer after she had spent on the moshav, we went to the moshav.
Yeah.
We met the farm,
Yeah.
the guy.
Her people.
The people, and where she wouldn't show us where she lived because she said it'll make you sick.
Yeah.
You can't see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was-
Different conditions there.
Right. But and she was picking grapes, and she was shoveling sheep shit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what our kids do there are, yeah.
I couldn't believe her hands.
Yeah.
I mean, they really were workable, worked over hands.
I bet they were.
But she had, and what's interesting is today, she's 56 years old. And she's very sympathetic to the Palestinians. Go figure.
Well, though they were probably working with her and she saw that some conditions and, listen, everyone's got their, everyone has their own story. I have Marcia and then Merle.
Oh, my kids went with the SKIP program, send a kid to Israel. Do they still do that?
They still do that, but Skip doesn't pay. You also paid what's the word? It's money for kids to go to Israel, and unless they go on birthright, Skip is not enough money for right. And we put in money.
Right, we put in money
Israel program,
but then it was matched, I thought. When
it was still not enough.
Yeah, well, we pay, but that's how they went. And Karen, I can't remember how the twins went to Poland first on that trip.
Yeah, there were different trips.
Ones, but
Yeah.
Karen didn't, but she, because it was a little bit late, I think, one of our relatives gifted her with it. And, she went with Rabbi Pupko and Alana Rubinstein. I mean, do you know Rabbi Puko? He's to
Yes,
come
I
to the
do.
kids. Oh, yeah, I know. He's a
Okay.
trip himself, but
And my grandma said, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything.
I know what you mean. So anyway, but so
Oh,
that
and
was my thing.
sorry, I don't have a poker face. And certainly not while we're recording. I mean,
No, less.
exactly.
Okay.
Although this is the truth. Anyway, Merle. Wait. I'm unmuting you. Go ahead. I unmuted you.
Thank you. Okay. The Hebrew teacher gave him these two things. And we know Dennis is a Gentile. Okay. She says, if we give up land for peace, the 6 million die in vain. Okay. But the other thing was marry a Gentile if you want to destroy 3,000 years of history, if you want to spit on the graves of the 6 million Jews. So he's walking around with all this in his head. And then on the tours, he knows there's nothing but lectures on these tours. He's not planting trees or picking fruit or anything interesting. Yeah. So he's getting filled with his head's getting filled with dates and details when all he wanted was to let his head be empty for a change. Okay, he's miserable. It was 100 degrees, and he had been in Fort Lauderdale visiting grandparents. He knew what it was to be in a hot climate, but he had to wear long pants because you couldn't go into a church or synagogue. He's just miserable. And all he wants to do is get to the Dead Sea where he can float for a while.
He can see if he floats.
Yeah, he's interested in that.
Yeah.
And it's not till the end of the trip. So
right.
There's so much sympathy you feel for this boy.
Right. So, my question, if Scott Nadelson was here, is, what were his Hebrew teachers like? Did he go to Israel with his grandparents? I mean, he really has it down. You can envision exactly what was happening there. And yeah, I was going to say something else. Yeah, Joyce and then Terry.
I sympathize and empathize with him, with Joel, so much when he was in Nazarene.
Oh, yeah.
Our first trip to Israel was in 1985. We had our kids with us. They were young. They were 13 and 15. They were like between the name of we have a lot of relatives. We have more relatives in Israel than we do.
Yeah.
And we were with one aunt and uncle, and I was told I needed to wear a dress. I needed to have a shawl over my shoulders. I mean, it was 100 degrees, but I put the shawl over. And I remember being in a bakery, and I remember the daggers that were coming out of the people's eyes.
Yeah.
Because I was not dressed properly. I had a sundress on, but I had tied it all around me. It wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And I said to my uncle, I said, Uncle Nate, please get me out of here. I cannot stay here, please. I just couldn't wait. It was horrible. It was the only time in the entire trip. And we were taken, all over Israel. One funny aside though, we were with another uncle, and he and my husband and I was in the back seat. We're taking an early morning drive, and my uncle had been whatever. And my uncle was taking us by a factory. And the factory was about to let out, and there were women lining the street. My husband said, Uncle Bobby, are those whores, street workers? And he said, yeah, Alan, you're in Israel. Even in Israel, there are Jewish
right.
men
right.
and Jewish
right. And Jewish prisons. They're and Jewish beggars. So we're getting towards the end. I have a couple of announcements. Merle.
I just wanted to say though that as much as he disliked the trip, he did enjoy meeting the young people carrying the rifles, and there was a
Oh,
girl
yes,
with a
yes,
golden shell case,
right.
and that may have been the highlight of the trip for him. And that he said if he had to live there, he might consider intermarriage or rethink his ideas about intermarriage.
Right. I mean, Alice, he didn't go to the Dead Sea. He wanted to. Right. 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 But he wanted to. And that picture with the Israelis, every single trip I've been on, take the same picture.
Mhm.
They absolutely, everyone says, can I have a picture? Can I? And, when the grandma said, can he hold the gun? Of course he can't hold the gun. I mean, it's just, but Terry.
I just wanted to just throw in one more anecdote because I thought the image of him standing at the wall when he was debating whether he should write a note and put it in the wall that said, get rid of Dennis.
Oh, right. Get rid of
He knew
Dennis.
God didn't make things so easy. If anything, he made Joel suffer through another year of Dennis just for asking. And at the end of that segment, he says, he spent some time staring up at the pigeons roosting on the stones above and wondered whether it would be a secret blessing or an omen of disaster to get crapped on. in the holiest place.
That was very funny. I forgot about that. That's a very good anecdote. Sandy.
Just for a little reprieve for us, we've been so worried about our grandson, and we've seen pictures every couple days of where he's been stationed on a rooftop or whatever. And last Friday night, after someone had brought them dinner, they were singing peace songs at the top of the roof. It was just beautiful. He sent us the video of it. These boys are beautiful boys, all of these soldiers. But today at 5:30 in the morning, we got the first laugh, because where is he? They moved him. They're on a kibbutz where all the people are gone. The kibbutz has been emptied out, but there are cows there that haven't been moved. And these cows need to be milked or they will die. And so he's on a kibbutz right today, milking. Yeah.
It's not easy milking a cow.
It isn't, but they must do it. And so the army sent this particular group, and it shows the cows running around. They're not even in a barn. Because of the danger to them, if they aren't milked, they let them loose in a field. And so it made me feel good that he was there.
That's a great story, Sandy. In 2 weeks, November 1st, we're going to read. No, this is the wrong thing. We're reading. This is wrong. My brother, Eli, by Joseph Epstein.
I have to tell you something.
Yes.
Joseph Epstein is an old friend of mine.
Oh, really? Let's call him.
He writes for he used to write for the Wall Street Journal.
Okay, we're going to talk. Let's talk.
I've had recent communication with him.
Oh, all right. So let's talk more. But the reason I have this book is this Sunday at 10 o'clock. Adam Mansbach is going to be at Adult Enrichment virtually. He wrote this book, The Golem of Brooklyn. It's really a cute book. And it's under 300 pages, which I find, most of the, a lot of these Jewish books are just long, long, long. His other claim to fame, and this group may or may not know it, he wrote a series of kids' books, the first one being Go the F to Sleep. Yeah, and you're right. And Samuel L. Jackson narrated it. So I was talking in the office, and Stacy says to me, well, ask him. He wants me to ask questions, which I will, and ask him if he met Samuel L. Jackson. Anyway, so we're going to have to talk about, because it's like a bestseller. Right, exactly. Anyway, so come on Sunday, 10 o'clock, and it's good seeing everyone. And if you have next Monday, it's Coffee with the Clergy, and we're going to have lox and bagels, 9:30 here. So come on down. We're going to talk a little bit about Israel. We were supposed to have somebody from Israel, and I kept saying to Rabbi Sarada, are they coming? Are they coming? I knew they weren't coming, and he's like, well, maybe. I think that, and then finally he goes, no, they're not coming. And I want to say, what's the matter with you? Anyway, so I'm making ham.
Vanessa, isn't it at 11 o'clock?
Next Monday is
thought
9:30 Lox and Bagels from 10 to 11. Check your Macomb at home. And I will go double check what we've been putting out there. And it's great to see everyone. If you need me, you know where to find me. Bye-bye.
Bye.